In a day and age where technology is creating a world without borders, filled with unlimited potential to improve the lives of the people around us, Innovarex Global Health ushers in a new way of leveling the playing field with increased access to quality healthcare services delivered at your doorstep. Our qualified professionals are equipped with state-of-the-art point-of-care testing technology to conduct tests such as kidney function, liver function, electrolyte tests, body composition, hemoglobin, A1C, and many more services with the highest efficiency in delivering results. The addition to our flagship Wellness on Wheels, more fondly known as WOW Delivery Service, brings the entire clinical experience full circle. IGH has remained committed to creating the future of healthcare delivery. Gone are the days of sending loved ones outside the country for basic medical services. Innovarex Global Health offers a new peace of mind and takes pride in delivering the quality of care we all deserve.
With whatever we do, Jioni safu nola. With whatever we do, haleyi demuni skula. Nyepamne ne kudlukula. Nyepangi ragala gena. Nyepamne ne kudlukula. Ibuloke nungoto ni beti sola. Ibuloke dato ni betoto.
Bigi Congo.
Lamin.
Na?
Lamin te jibe norin te nyame Lamin.
Kabona wulo kono.
Wulo kono nyinte mo Lamin.
Pabilenki.
Muna ngata afamole.
Haina.
Ngata. Ngoto le. Fabrama.
Mingi. Baba nyole.
Ngoto le Fabrama.
Namu jumala kan kuma diteng.
Fabrama.
Jumala mu.
Ndele bare muso.
Lunda mana.
Kamo kata.
Jamani mbere.
Alindo ko.
Jamani.
Bari ngoto man kontande.
Bari jamani fana na ramu man kontan.
Ngoto minaka ngalamin je fom filitala. Lamin jibe nori nyala.
Lamin ila sira sama na benki. Yala so tol sayni no ko mollo ko momo.
Ngoto.
Nam.
Iterinte yalo ne Lamin hakilo diata bake karambu ngoto. Anu santeng ministry ko di ngole si suoko na amake ko do holiday la
sibitun
bagona de
ala ni ko kede namo balo
ala ni na ko ina karta bulo be damen ala ni je
ngoto
nam
ngoto mon kontan feren
jamani mu nekata
ifika Lamin ki wulo ko no nyintay mon ko do fete malo Lamin nyande sila la be la moy kala karango
jamani karamol be sorande ne ko fasita wulo ko nako
karambugol ma soron ni ko karambugol soron da amake comme holiday lem ngoto dini ngo nyanta sila la ala karango la moy yamen kamen fue man kontan andamande
alla nyin kombo kurang adanda la kombo len do la jankara mungol soron dal do kamen kurang ma ra la kombo e ko ndol fana na kara mungol soron je kara mungol soron Lamin ada lo nyino la amanta ra fena sokon ala munekela
Lamin ite foyde malon ko lesinol be ke kar radio to
nga fine
e ko yana ni mo Lamin ya muna fonye
bi kabin mina kan ntambita nteri maning Fatou ntambite la sukol ala diningol bebe siri be la moyka
Fatou danso am fana tambira jele ni subala la ngaje diningol be jet talanta nen kili warol e be serin jelet
sa Lamin farante ku kili ko keno la ba Lamin bitaka wulo ko no nyinta mo Lamin
amandara fenela
ite dine ko di man si yakari lesuno la moy radio to e balon na
muneka ke afonde ba nyara ni alon
kelentel jikot
afonde ba munebe ke
ite balon tel be cikritel ni man karambe ku kele yaje nata karana mbasa mala ya itarije
par ñarande kombo courant ho findira kombo ide na rajede ni sonka bay ko Lamin manyata la wulo ko aru karam wolbe so da fa membe kala
ko to wole nati ba ngal le Lamin kuntal kombo courant e ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e sisu kono bari ni ko e sisu kono be karangol dike la radio lin telel to hani tele masoto to nya man tele soto da bungo bar radio be bulan koto
Ha, wa
batiri sanga I see ayala mo
sa abe o kala
kono
nyaadi
ta ro bulaji
abe o kala nyaadi
kamun ke nyaadi
radio abe wala moy la ibe mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti talle be radio ko men ka karande
ila subject ro baby jele baby jele
wala nan ka coco moy fa dan so wolya ngombe tambi kana ngadi ni wolje be ikadum bungo ko kada maro mo
asoto talde
la min mala be kara wala de
bari lafta alal ideal on ko inde every year second wala fourth
muna mi ko ndé ko folle sini lamba ndé le sini lo ne ba
mba say mba foke en koto wole fango yen wulindi yalo famo keta bat ñu fanam bulata ko ko me yen nati jambi la min nyanta karana ndel be jiko be nyine ka ya bulay kara wulo kono ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje koto dindi ngoy si ayala le sino la moy radio
wara ka munda kara mo man soro la min nyanta kara si so na radio
la sila le ayala le sino
ndal ko korno ko smolon
kilar ya
mo be ngala ko mo say mi do ni ko no kera
mengi bruso
ndebe ko ro la ba rosa no radio ba no bari woro radio ni abe jele ba do ngamra do man dembe buljan dala nyara nyar wo ko fendi mo la ba min tayra ba rosa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori nya labi tamete ku
teku
bari ko do famo ke
imagine nañu ñambol si sol le keje kisiki man si sol no le kafun ka ñoma bari ñambu kino ni mañana ka finde ni nambe ko sol la jang ni nambe ko sol la jang
ngalle limbeta de be ñambo do dilanna
ñara ni ko rin fennat ñara nata
ko to bari famo ke da
ngata bungono tambi bungono ñara mel ngando ko fele ko ke e baru nganda ni pelo la ndija
iyo awa be tar la
bungono bismillah bisu diara
pendulala yefungo tanka sina dolu tanka koro ta koro
Good day, wonderful viewers and listeners. My name is Amijaite, your teacher, who is back again to continue with our literature in English lesson. If you can fully remember, the last lessons were on Introduction to Literature, which took us to the branch of literature called drama. And of course, we looked at drama as a lesson. Today, we are going to look at another branch of literature that is called poetry. And by the end of my lesson, you should be able to know the concept poetry. You should be able to know the types of poems that we have, and you should be able to know the elements of poetry that we have. But first, we will start with the concept of poetry. So stay tuned and enjoy the lesson. Poetry is defined as an imaginative composition of rhythmic lines. Poetry analyzes various issues with limited words that are well structured to have a meter and a rhyme. Poetry evokes a poet's feeling about a given subject, that is the theme. That is to say that every poem surrounds itself with a theme. Now, which he or she expresses in rhyme, that is his choice, the choice of words that he will want to use. Maybe line 1 and line 3 will rhyme together, and on rhyme lines, maybe the writer also chooses not to use rhyme when writing his poem, and then divide it into verses and stanzas. Poetry differs from drama and prose because it uses rhyme. The beauty of poetry is enhanced by the evocation of expression of thought and feeling. So that is to say, poetry is different from the other two branches of literature that we have because it uses limited and then it compresses words to express the information that it wants its audience to get. From the concept of poetry, we will now move to the types of poem that we have. Just like drama, poetry is also divided into different types. The first one that we have is called a narrative poem. Now, a narrative poem is a poem in which the poet clearly uses characters, like we told you, just like drama as a branch of literature, it uses characters which are the people, the animal, or the object that act in a play. Poetry also uses characters. It uses plot, which is the sequence of events in a literary work. It uses scenes to retell how an event once occurred. Narrative poem is just like a story that is told in the form of a poem. Remember, since it is narrative, we are still explaining what already happened in the past. Example of that could be The Proud King, which is one of the poems of the grade 12. Now, from the narrative poem, we move to another type of poem that is called ideal. Now, ideal is a short poem which describes an interesting or a beautiful rural scene or event. If you go to the rural setting, you will realize that there are so many beautiful things that happen there. Now, the ideal is used to describe, is a type of poem that describes interesting happenings or interesting beautiful rural scenes. Example is circumcision in the village. If you go to the village like Jenjamburi, the initiation that happens there is different from how it happens in the urban setting here. So a poem that describes a beautiful rural scene is what we call an ideal. Now, from that, we move to another type of poem that is called folktale. Now, folktale is also a narrative in oral tradition. When we were young, sometimes you will go to your grandma because you want to hear more stories, stories about animals, stories about people, stories about society. Now, those stories are what we call folktales. It includes fables, fable, as you know, is a story that uses animals as characters and teaches moral lesson. It uses legend, which talks about the heroic deeds of people. It also uses myth. It could be interesting as well as horrifying. Now, from folktale, we move to another type of poem that is called negritude. Now, negritude is a word which is used to classify literary works. It is primarily aimed at promoting the beauty, the excellence, and the supremacy of the black race. We are talking about poems that talk about the liberation, that support the black race. Those are the poems that we call negritude. It is more or less like a protest poem. Example of that poem is Piano and the Drums. If you can remember, I'm talking to the grade 12s. Piano and Drum is a poem that talk about the African race and also talk about the European race. But in it, we have seen that the writer supports more of the African. He uses the piano to represent the European culture and he uses the drum to represent the African culture. So, but at the end of the day, you will realize that his love and his admiration for his African culture is more than that of the European culture. So a poem that supports, a poem that talk about the freedom, the liberation of the black race is what we refer to as a negritude. Not only piano and drums, but also anvil and hammer is also another example of a negritude poem. Now, from negritude poem, we move to another type of poem that is called a lullaby. Now, a lullaby is a mother to a child poem in which the former uses soft voice and melodious songs to put the latter to sleep or to make him or her to stop crying. All of us, our mothers have used lullabies on us. Like when a baby is crying and refusing to stop crying, the mother may choose to sing songs, to the beautiful songs that will make the baby to stop crying. Now, a mother to a child poem, in order to stop the child from crying or to make the child to sleep, is what we call a lullaby. An example could be sleep, sleep, little one, close your eyes, sleep, little one. These are some nice poems that mothers use on their children to make them stop crying or to go to sleep. From lullaby, we move to another type that is called a ballad. Now, a ballad is also a story or a narrative that is told or sung in verse, usually by words of mouth. These are also poems, but they are also sung. From ballad, we move to another type that is called a concite. Now, a concite is an argumentative poem in which the poet agrees or disagrees with the idea of life after death or the existence or the non-existence of heaven or of hell. Now you will understand that people have different belief about life, different belief about death. Death is something everybody believes, but life after death or the existence of heaven and hell is something that everybody does not believe. Now this, if a poem is written argumentatively, talking about the two, is what we refer to as a concert. From a conceit, we move to another type that is called a metaphysical poem. Now, a metaphysical poem is a poem which relates to matters beyond nature or our world. In it, the poet appears fanciful with far-fetched ideas about the supernatural world. These are poems written but about things that are beyond nature here. From the metaphysical poem, we move to another type of poem that is called a lyric. Now, a lyric is a short personal poem expressing emotion. If I am sad and then I write a poem, it's a lyric. It is usually sung during ceremonies or celebrations. From lyric, we move to another type of poem that is called a pastoral poem. Now, a pastoral poem is a poem which relates to life in the village or countryside. Poem that talks about things that happen in the village. Poems that are primarily for the village, written specifically for the village, are what we call a pastoral poem. It has nothing to do with the urban setting, only the rural side and the rural people. That is what we call a pastoral poem. Now, from pastoral poem, we move to another type of poem that is called ode. Now, an ode is usually a long poem. It is a lyric on a definite subject which may cover heroic, horror, strength, bravery, etc., and presented during important occasion. For instance, we want to talk about the bravery of a particular hero, or we want to talk about the magnanimity of a particular leader. Example of that is an ode, but it is presented during important occasions. Now, from ode, we move to another type of poetry that is called epic. Now, an epic is also a long narrative in which the heroic deed of a person with extra human qualities are mentioned. It also talks about the history of a country. The praise singers use exaggerated words often referred to as poetry. For instance, on the day of the independence, you hear a lot of historical songs about the Gambia. You hear so many things during which people like us learn so many things, talking about the beautiful nature of the country, talking about the struggle for independence, and all that is what we refer to as an epic. From epic, we move to another type of poetry that is called a duet. Now, a duet is a poem, but it is a piece of music. Remember, poetry can also be changed into what music. It is the only branch of literature that can be changed from a written poem can be changed to a music. Okay, now this is a piece of music sung or played by two people. When two people come up to sing a song, is what we refer to as a duet. Now, from that, we move to another type that is called a satirical. Now, a satirical is a form of poem that mocks or ridicules a person's folly or societal institution by exposing their ill. Example of a satire is Harvest of Corruption, where we can see in the Jefferson Society issues like corruption, issues like bribery, issues like drug smuggling, issues like so many things were brought out. That is what we call a satire. So when you ridicule the act of a society in an amazing way, you are using what we call a satire. Now, from satirical, we move to another one that is called a traditional poem. Now, a traditional poem is a poem which belongs to oral tradition of poetry in Africa. We're not talking about the new ones, but we are talking about poems that belong to the oral tradition of poetry in Africa, to show you that poetry has started a long, long time. So when we talk about poetry that has happened long, long time in Africa and about Africa, is what we refer to as a traditional poem. From that, we move to another type of poem that is called Elegy. Now, Elegy, this is a poem of praise or commendation in which a person's superb qualities and achievements are mentioned. Maybe we want to talk about President Dawda Jawara, we want to talk about his superb qualities, we want to talk about his achievements. That is what we refer to as Elegy. From Elegy, we move to another type that is called a dirge. Now, a dirge is a poem of sadness and sorrow. It can be one of hardship or disappointment. From dirge, we move to another one that is called elegy. Now, elegy is a poem expressing grief on the death of someone. When you recite a poem, example of it is Lonely Days. In Lonely Days, you can see women like Fayoyin, Radike, crying, saying words. Those are what we call elegy. From that, we move to another one that is called epitaph. Now, epitaph is usually written on the tomb of the deceased. If you go to the graveyard, you will see something like writings on the grave or the tomb of a deceased. Example of that could be Jack Seka, born on the 12th of December 1912, served in the Tapalapa Army, died gallantly on the 23rd of February 2003. May his gentle soul rest in perfect peace. That is an example of an epitaph written on the tomb of the deceased. From epitaph, we move to another subtopic that is elements of poetry. When we talk about elements of poetry, we are referring to the composition of poetry. Now, the first one that we have is poesy. Please take note. The first one that we have is called poesy. Now, poesy is the art of composing or writing of poems. When the act of writing and composing of poems is what we call poesy. Now, poet is a person who writes a poem. You have to take note of the two. Poesy is the art of composing or writing of poems, but a poet is a person who writes a poem or poems. So take note of the two. From poesy, poet, and to style. Now, style refers to the self-desired way in which a poet presents his viewpoint in a poem. Now, people have different styles of doing something. So your self-desired way of how you will present your viewpoint in a poem, it covers the length. It's your decision to choose the kind of length that you want. It is also your decision to decide on the arrangement of how your poem is going to be arranged. Also the choice of words, which is the diction. Maybe you will want to use simple words that everybody will read and understand, or probably you will want to use complex words in conveying your message to the readers, and also the rhymic pattern. So style covers all that. From style, we move to another element that is called diction. Now, diction is referred to the writer's selected choice of words. Like I have just mentioned, diction is your choice of words. Maybe you want to use simple words that everybody will read and understand. You want to use complex words to convey the message to your audience. It's up to the person. So, the words could be simple or complex depending on its intended audience. When you're writing a poem for the primary school students, your diction should be a very simple diction. When you are using, when your audience are the junior secondary school students, you use different type of words, and when it is senior school students and also university. So diction refers to the choice of words depending on your audience. Now, from diction, we move to another element that is called theme or subject matter. Now, this is the central idea which a poem carries in its content. Every poem surrounds itself with a subject matter. So, how you present your poem should surround a subject matter. which is developed in the contents. Now from that, we move to another element that is called structure. Now structure refers to the makeup or the organization of your poem. People have different ways of structuring their poems. Maybe you want to write your poem in 6 stanzas. Maybe you want to write your poem without stanzas. That is called a free verse. So the structure refers to the makeup or organization of a poem in lines or verses and stanzas. Each section, that is a stanza, is expected to convey a definite message. So structure has to do with the arrangement of our ideas within the stanzas of the poem. Now from structure, we move to another element that is called narrative technique. Now narrative technique refers to the poetic method used by a writer to express his or her thought. It cuts across the use of first person. There are different types of narrative technique. We have the first person narrative technique, the second person narrative technique, and the third person narrative technique. The composition of ideas and the application of rhymed and unrhymed schemes and diction. So narrative technique refers to the different types of persons that narrate a story. First person, second person, and third person. From the narrative technique, we move to another element of drama that is called setting. Now setting, just like drama, setting refers to the time, that is the historical setting, place, that is the geographical setting, and people, that is the social milieu used in a poem, play, or novel. These 3 basic elements are essential in a poet's attempt to wisely impact his or her thought and on audience. Every poem uses setting. If you look at piano and drums, for instance, it uses setting at the riverside. The poem uses at the riverside. It means the setting of his poem is at the riverside. Maybe I want to write a poem about the village. When I go to the village, it means my setting is at the village. So setting refers to the place and the time and action takes place. From that, we move to another element that is called symbolism. Now, symbolism, we dealt with it in drama, but here it is again as another element of another branch of literature called poetry. Now, symbolism is simply the use of words which represent something else. Like I told you, when one thing stands for something else is what we refer to as symbolism. I gave you an example of the national flag of the Gambia to show you that the red symbolizes the sun, the white symbolizes the peace, the blue for the river Gambia, and the green for the agriculture. So when one thing stands for something else, it is called a symbolism. From symbolism, we move to another element that is called imagery. Now, imagery is a word used to create mental picture of its relevance to the given poem. These are mental pictures that are created on the minds of readers. If I just write on the board here, a man is tapping wine on the palm tree. As soon as I say it, you create a mental picture of someone that is climbing up the palm tree looking for wine. So those mental pictures that are, like if I mention a word, Cinderella, you immediately create the mental picture of Cinderella in your head. So mental imageries are mental pictures that are created on the minds of readers. This is done in a way that the symbols and other pieces of information are carefully presented to enhance the reader's understanding. Now from that, we will look at the different types of imageries that we have. We have the first one that is called a visual image. Remember, we said that images are mental pictures that are created on the minds of readers. But then we have different types of images. The first one is a visual image. Now, a visual image, this is the use of image which appeal to the eye. If the word is visual, definitely it has to do with the eye. So these are mental pictures created which appeal to the eye. Those are called visual images. From that, we move to another one that is called auditory images. Auditory. Now, this is the use of sound which appeals to the ear, that is the sound effect. The next one is called gustatory images. Now, this is the use of image which appeal to the sense of taste, like salt, like sugar, like sweet, etc. The next one is called tactile or tactual images. Tactile or tactual images are images which appeal to the sense of touch. Example, embrace, hold, touch, etc. Another one is called the thermal image. The use of image of heat which appeal to the skin or the body is called thermal image. The next one is called olfactory image. Now, this refers to the use of image which appeals to the nose, sense of nose. Example, the aroma, the odor, etc. We have another type of image that is called a kinetic image. Now, the kinetic image is the use of words which create a feeling of movement in the reader. Kinetic, hence movement. Example, fly, glide, strolled, etc. Comprehensively, all these images above are sensuous images because they appeal to our senses and sometimes attract us. From images and the types of images, we will move to another element that is called atmosphere. You have to listen carefully so that you'll be able to distinguish between atmosphere, mood, and tone. Now, atmosphere, this refers to the prevailing circumstance under which a poet or novelist or playwright writes. The atmosphere influences his mood, which is very carefully published in the writer's tone. So from the atmosphere, we talk about the prevailing circumstance under which the writer writes. Now, the atmosphere of a poet determines the mood of a poem, and the mood of a poem also determines the tone that he is going to use, so take note. From that, we will look at tone. Tone and mood work together. My mood determines my tone. So tone and mood work together to create in us a feeling or thought about a poem. Tone refers vividly to the manner in which the poet handles or talks about a particular subject matter. Thus, the tone of the poem could be of anger or happiness, confidence or distrust, content or dissatisfaction, love or resentment, hope or despair, depending on what he or she wants to write on. From the tone, we now look at the mood. Now, the mood is simply the effect of the tone. Like I told you, your mood determines the kind of tone that you're going to use. So just as mood is the effect of an atmosphere, just as it is said, the atmosphere also determines my mood. Put very simply, the tone of the poem is triggered by the mood of the writer. As a result of an existing atmosphere, the tone also creates a mood based on the writer's or the reader's understanding. From that, we move to another element that is called a limerick. Now, a limerick is a humorous poem with 5 lines. The rhyme scheme is A, B, B, and A. A limerick is a poem that has 5 lines. When we talk about A, B, B, we are referring to the rhyme scheme. Now, the rhyme scheme is the representation of letters at the end of every poem. The second and the last rhyme which are with one another, while the third and the fourth rhyme with. When we talk about A, B, B, it means the line 1 and line 2 have the same end sound, line 3 and line 4 have the same end sound, then the last line have the same end sound with the first 2. So that is why we have the rhyme scheme A, B, B, A. We will deal with rhyming scheme as the lesson proceeds. From limerick, we move to another one that is called acrostic or paracrostic. Now, this is a poem in which the initial letters of each line or verse reproduce a word. They are like abbreviations. This is a very common poem found in homes and offices, used as a guideline to lay down strict principles. Example, we have hen. When we talk about hen, what does hen means? Hen means hatch as many as possible, for everyone need your egg for growth and vitality in order to build a nation healthy and strong. So the acrostic there refers to the word